Today I'd like to talk about an issue that is impacting all of us, whether we know it or not. It's one that really is swirling in turmoil in our culture and in our country, and something I think needs to be talked about. And I'll get to that in just a second. If you're new to this channel though, or maybe you watch some of these videos and have not yet, why don't you subscribe? You can also hit that notification bell and that will let you know when new videos come online. It's my goal to produce as much content as possible that would be helpful to you and maybe to some of the things that are going on in our lives that we can think through and talk through together. And so I'd ask you to do that. Go ahead and subscribe. You can like the video, you can share the video, and all of those things allow me to get more content out to more people. So I'd appreciate it. The issue that we're going to talk about for just a couple of minutes today is the issue of abortion and the sanctity of life. If you also follow me on Twitter, you know that over the last couple of days, I think I put 3-minute-long videos on there dealing with a couple of aspects of this conversation. And in a minute, you can't cover much, but just some seed for thoughts or some food for thought on those topics. But I wanted to spend a few minutes today in maybe a longer video talking about this issue because it's just that important. One of the reasons that I do these videos is to provide content that's helpful to people who are thinking through some of these issues. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is because I want to leave my thoughts on these issues behind. Over the years, things have, even in my lifetime, have changed and morphed, and we're having discussions now that we never would have had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and certainly further back than that. And I know 10, 15, 20, and more years into the future, we'll have other conversations that we didn't plan on having. And as folks look for answers to some of the issues we don't even know are issues yet, I hope that some of this content is available for them, and it's content that they can go back and get some direction from. And so for a lot of reasons, it's important to me to talk about this very important, really very sad topic, this one of abortion and the sanctity of life. We look at the conversation that we're having in our country, and so many extremely intelligent people with large platforms are having this conversation. Many are putting forward science and physical evidence of when life begins, or at least a point in time where we believe that life begins. I personally believe that life begins at conception, but science is going back so far, just beyond the point of conception, really, to talk about a heartbeat and brain waves and those things. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a very, very, very small child born prematurely, smallest baby ever born, and not thought to be viable outside of the womb. Spent a few months in intensive care at the hospital and is home growing and is viable and is doing well. Science is getting better, and because of that, we're starting to understand more of these things than we ever have before. And as those things are being put forward and the importance of life is being put forward and these arguments are being put forward, you'd think that there would be a conversation, that people would look at the evidence and debate the evidence and talk about the evidence and then come to conclusions, but that's not at all what's happened. One of the things that's been very sad to me about this topic of abortion and the sanctity of life is that there is no open dialogue. There seems to be either a left or right position. Why this is political blows my mind. There's nothing political about the issue of life, but it's become that. And for those that oppose a pro-life position, or a position that says life begins well beyond the point of birth, there's not much pushback in the way of intelligent argument or conversation. It's very hateful, extremely mean-spirited, doesn't even begin to encompass what people are saying about those who believe that life begins before the point of birth. The mocking, the ridicule, it's unbelievable to me. And a few months ago, I thought that there could be a real conversation around this, but clearly there cannot be a real conversation around it. So my purpose isn't necessarily to have a conversation, but to share my opinion, because I hope that it can be helpful to someone. Why is this so important? The conversation around life, and I've talked about this before, but the conversation around life is a central conversation, in my opinion, as it relates to not only who we are as human beings, but who we are as Americans. When we look at the role of government in the United States, it's expanded well beyond anything I think the founders had in mind. But if we were to sum up the role of the government in the United States, whether it's the federal government or state and local governments, The main goal of the government, or the main role of the government, is to defend life. The framers even talked about the inalienable right of life. It's the thing that you cannot take away. You can take away a lot of things, but you can't take away the right to life, the right to live. And the role of the government is to protect life. So as we talk about this issue of abortion and the sanctity of life, the role of government foundationally is to protect all life. And so when we can come to a point where we believe life begins here or life begins there, or it's proven that life begins over here, the role of the government should be, if functioning correctly, to protect that life and to defend that life. And yet there are so many that are screaming for legislation, and in some states this has happened, that are not only not protecting life, but protecting the right to end life. It's unbelievable. And I have to ask myself the question, why are people so loud, so vocal, and so hateful, and so willing to push even the government and others into taking life? Because when we believe that there's something more important than us, including that child growing inside of us, when we believe that, it means we then cannot do whatever we want to. Really, this abortion argument in a lot of ways comes down to self-will. This don't touch my body, or it's my right to choose, and the language around those things is nothing more than saying no one has a right to tell me what to do or how to treat others. When the reality is, it's not about you making a decision to do what you want to do. It's about protecting the life that may be inside of you. It's about protecting life, and that's the role of the government. I know there are folks who have had abortions, and the research, the studies done on the psychology of those who have had abortions and the long-lasting psychological and emotional implications of that. It's done. The research is available. People choose to ignore it, but the research is available. And I know that in this conversation, there are people who would hear this that may be hurt. And it's certainly not the point to hurt those who have had an abortion, but going forward to say that this is not okay. This is not something that we celebrate. Now, for those who have, there needs to be support and encouragement, and we need to do what we can to counsel them through that and get them to a place where they can live a life that is hope-filled and purposeful. I'm all for that. But I believe that we are also at a point where there are those who should be held accountable for ending life. We have that conversation. The United States has always been a country that has stood for the oppressed and stood for those who could not stand for themselves or speak for themselves. This is central to who we are as Americans. And yet we're turning our back on this in an amazingly brazen way. The question is asked, what do you do if you are pro-life, if you're preserving all life? What do you do for those unwanted children, or for those mothers who did not intend to get pregnant but are going through this process because of the various what we would call exceptions? What do you do with that? Well, the Bible tells us that pure religion is to visit the widows and fatherless in their affliction. The Bible talks about caring for those who cannot care for themselves, whether that be children or those who are carrying children or bringing children into the world. We certainly have a responsibility to help those who can't help themselves or take care of themselves. There are many who would love to adopt but can't because of regulations that would prohibit it. Wonderful families. Adoption is an extremely expensive process in our country, and I believe there should be protections, but there should also be the availability of finding good homes to receive children who need good homes. There's a lot we can do on that front, and we need to, but these are not the same conversation. Caring for those who can't care for themselves is a responsibility that we as a community need to take on. We should take on. But that conversation is separate from the conversation about whether or not we have the right to end a life. We don't have that right. I could spend a long time talking about all of these things, but I really believe that this conversation is a conversation in many ways, not trying to sound dramatic, but in many ways for the soul of our nation. When we say it's okay to take the life of the unborn, then what we're also saying is it's okay to take whatever we find inconvenient or not something we want to deal with. Nothing is off limits or off the table when we're willing to end the life of a child. We'll also take the life of those who we consider too sick to contribute to society, those who don't play an important role in the world that we live in, those who have something that we want and may stand in the way of us getting that. What's off limits when we're willing to take the life of a child? I said this earlier this week, and I believe this is absolutely true, that the argument that we're involved in right now, the debate that we're having right now, abortion, is not about the right to choose, but about whether or not we as a nation will continue to defend the inalienable right of life or put our arms around a culture of death. That's not a dramatic statement, it's a true statement. We need to deal with the issue. We've got a long history of having dealt with it wrong. Let's walk to the place where we deal with it right. Let's make the right decisions to protect life. Let's figure out how to not only protect that life, but protect and help the mother who's bringing that life into the world, regardless of the circumstance. And let's embrace a culture of life that lifts everyone up, regardless of station, and allows us as Americans to do what we've always done, to give a voice to the voiceless, to give a will to those who can't exert it on their own, to speak for those who need someone to speak on their behalf, and to protect those who have no one else to stand up for them and provide the protection they need. This is an important debate. It's an amazing opportunity that we have to voice our position on this. And I would encourage everyone to voice lovingly, kindly, but firmly and directly that they stand for life, as others have stood for ours. Abortion and the sanctity of life. There are few topics at this moment in time that are as important because they touch everything else that we do. Where do you stand on this? I would encourage you, stop listening to the screaming and the shouting and the arguing and the bickering and come to a real decision based on real fact and understanding the real implications of the decision that you make.